Okay, this is a tutorial on how to write up your findings. Now, in a real geographic project that you're going to be submitting to the exam board, this section is worth the most marks. It will include your processed data, which normally looks like a series of maps, graphs, charts, diagrams, annotated photos, and maybe a statistical test. So that would be processed data. And it then is your reflection and analysis of that, of each of those bits of data that you've presented. You're familiar with this from both National 5 and higher, and you've been progressively developing your ability to analyze. At this stage, we're less interested in the description of the data, although that still is required. But what we're more interested in is your analysis. So that's the explanation for what you're seeing. Okay. Step one is going to be the actual generation of your process data. You might choose to include a table of data with your kind of the main summary or highlights or averages of your results across, in this case, St Andrews. That's a very low level and basic form of process data. So you're probably going to have maybe a graph or a map, which shows a trend or a pattern or allows us to compare. Now, because this is a study where you're gathering data across an area, you're probably going to want to look to map your data. So you and your group should decide certainly what mapping technique you're going to use, what's appropriate to show patterns. Certainly in this case, you're looking at traffic varying, whatever aspect of traffic you're studying. And you're also looking at people's sense of well-being. There's a chance you're going to want to maybe graph your data because you are looking for a relationship. You're seeing if traffic is influencing well-being. So you might think, what graph is suitable for looking for relationships between two different factors? You might want to add some labels or even annotations to any maps or graphs that you include in your project, in your findings. And that what that does is, if you've got an arrow with a text box pointing to something on a graph or a map, it makes me, the reader, look at it and reflect on it and think about that in a little bit more detail. And that might be what you're wanting to do. You might also have some photographs of locations. Now that I strongly recommend that you do have them included, because one or two of your locations may be, for example, where people had a real strong sense of well-being or very weak. They might be in areas with huge traffic issues or none, and you're wanting to highlight that through a photograph. And of course, if you're going to put a photograph in, it should be annotated. So as the reader, I know why that photo has been put in there. Okay. So have that discussion. Think about what technique best shows the pattern, trend, or comparison that I'm wanting my data to show. And preferably, can I do this digitally or do I have to do this by hand? There are digital solutions for almost everything. And these days, you are encouraged to try to use technology to complete this. Right. Once you've agreed on your techniques, go ahead and complete them. And you're going to, in this case, probably have more than one. And you can do this as a group if you want and share your process data. Right, step two is where you start talking about your data. Now, each piece of process data should have a discussion in its own right. So you need to tell me what that piece of data is and analyze it. But you should also connect your different bits of process data. So if your map is related to your graph, or your photograph is related to your map or graph, then make explicit connections in your text when you're writing about them. So you could say, you can see in figure 1, blah, 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 and this is also shown clearly in figure 2, which is a photograph, and then this was also linked to figure 3, which shows this, and the reason there's a link. That's how you're aiming to write about this. Connect your different bits of process data so the reader can see those connections. Don't assume they will automatically just get the connections. Right, your writing in general should, when you describe something, you should talk about what's the overall pattern and trend. Don't go into the detail. Don't be, feel you have to describe every single bit of data, but what's the overall stuff that you can see, and make sure that when you make those observations that you actually use some of the data from the graphs or the maps in your descriptions. A little bit like you did at higher and National 5. Okay, but you don't want to be overly specific in this. Keep it reasonably general. Give me the overall highlights that of what the graph or what the map are showing. What you then want to do is analyze it. So you want to give me reasons for whatever you're seeing. Now, those reasons might be connected to some photographs you've got. Those reasons might be connected to some background research that you've got. And this brings me on to this step, which is you definitely at least once, and more than once if you can, going to want to actually refer back to something that you discussed in your background research. Whether what you've seen in your data is similar or whether it's different from what you were talking about earlier on in your background research. This is the high tariff area of any advanced type project. This is where they push you up to the top band if you are doing that. You're making those connections between your little study and other people's work. Anytime you spot something that doesn't fit a pattern, the one site that just stands out as being different from the ones around it, or the one piece of data that you've got that's very different from all the others, you need to point that one out, and that needs to be, or attempt to be, explained. Okay, you don't necessarily need to be right, but you need to offer some suggestions for why that might be. You might even want to conduct some individual research, go on the web, find out something more that you can then refer to, maybe even cite a quote or some fact that you found that then goes on to explain why that is an anomaly. Okay, and I've already talked about images and how you weave them into the writing of your project. So pictures that are annotated are very strong ways of communicating in geography. They're often overlooked by by a lot of other people, but when we have a picture with some annotations on it, all of our writing suddenly comes to life. It helps people understand what you're trying to say through your words. Okay, step 3. You don't need to do step 3 if you don't want to, but in your actual project, you're definitely going to want to do this. We've already hopefully done a Spearman rank, a simple statistical test. You can go online and do a Spearman rank where you put your 2 data sets, in this case your traffic data set, and your people's well-being data in, and it will do that for you. All you've then got to do is report what your results mean, whether they were statistically significant or not. And if you do a statistical test, especially because in this case you're looking at relationships and Spearman rank is specifically designed for that, as is actually, there is another test that would do that. Then it's a stronger thing to do. It leads you to making a stronger conclusion about whether you've proved or not proved your hypothesis. Now, I would say avoid writing a conclusion at this stage. You can, and it might seem natural to you to write a conclusion, and if you choose to do so, that's fine. In an actual advanced sci project, because you'll have 3 research questions, each would have their own conclusion. You might choose to make your conclusion at this stage for that one research question you're writing about, and do the same when you did a second and a third. But because we're only doing one, in order to give ourselves a decent conclusion to write about, I wouldn't write a conclusion at this stage. I would do that when you get to the next step.